Good evening, Lake Washington School District families, staff, students, and community. Welcome to the first of two live events this week. My name is John Holman, Superintendent of the Lake Washington School District. First, I want to start by recognizing the tremendous amount of work that has been done by hundreds of staff and administrators over the last few months as we prepare for the 2021 school year. While the majority of our students will start in a remote learning model, we are anxiously anticipating and looking forward to the time when conditions will allow us to serve our students in person. Each staff member in Lake Washington chose education as a career to support and serve students. I'm proud of the tremendous efforts right now by all staff to prepare for high quality in teaching and learning this fall. I would also like to recognize our board of directors that are present tonight. Both Vice President Stewart and Director Bleasner, thank you for joining us tonight. I appreciate the board's dedication to our students, staff, and community during these most uncommon times. Tonight, you will hear from multiple central administrators regarding three specific topics. The first presentation tonight will focus on equity. Our primary job as an organization is to ensure that our schools and classrooms are safe, inclusive, and welcoming. Our equity work helps us to focus on issues and factors that deviate from this and include issues related to race, ability, means, language, and other factors that have led to marginalization or reduced access and opportunity. We know there are specific populations that have not had the same opportunity and access to their entire educational process, and we are committed to doing the work and change to ensure all students achieve successful outcomes. Our mission is focused on each student graduating, and it is our responsibility to ensure our systems are aligned to provide appropriate supports to allow all students positive outcomes. Tonight, Director Gloria Henderson will share information about the ongoing and interconnected equity work in Lake Washington. The next presentation you will hear will provide details about our planning related to elementary students. The presentation team will provide context for the example schedule shared with the community last week and outcomes of remote learning for elementary students. Additionally, you will hear about professional learning for staff and the plan for elementary students that receive accelerated program services. Finally, tonight, you will hear about our planning for students with disabilities that qualify for special education services. Dr. Shannon Hitch will give an update related to our plan for special education services based on the guidance and requirements from both state and federal authorities. We know that special education services were challenging in the spring. Dr. Hitch will provide information about the distinct differences between the spring closure services and the service delivery model we will start the school year with this year. Dr. Hitch will talk about the service delivery decisions that will be made to offer remote or in-person services for students. I hope you enjoy your evening and you find the presentations informative and beneficial. And with that, I would like to introduce Matt Gillingham, Associate Superintendent of Student and Community Services. Mr. Gillingham will introduce our first presenter and topic tonight. Thank you and enjoy your evening.
All right, thank you, Dr. Holman, and thank you very much for everybody for joining us tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce Gloria Henderson, our Director of Opportunity, Equity, and Inclusion. She is going to share with us tonight a lot of the professional learning that we've been undergoing as a system, as educational leaders throughout the summer, and that we're going to be engaging with our teachers and staff as we welcome everybody back to the start of the 2020 school year. This work is really critically important as our focus on equity is central to our mission as a school district. As Dr. Holman talked about, we want to make sure that every student feels safe, welcomed, included, and has access to the full range of opportunities that we provide as a school district. Plus, it's also critical that we're able to, as an educational institution, to lean into conversations around race and equity as part of our mission of preparing students to enter the global society and being prepared as citizens. So this is critical work that we're doing as a school district, and I'm really excited that Gloria gets to share the work that she's been leading in partnership with other directors across our organization, and to kind of help provide some context for the work and the journey that we're undergoing, so that we can be really prepared to welcome each and every student back at the start of this school year. So with that, please welcome Gloria Henderson, and thank you, Gloria, for presenting here tonight.
Thanks, Matt. And thank you to our entire district. I really appreciate being here tonight. All right, so just a brief overview. Tonight we'll be looking at the work of the Opportunity, Equity, and Inclusion Department, a brief history of over the last 3 years of our equity efforts within the school district, the foundation of our equity work, and we'll also take a look at some data and the story it tells and the story that it does not. And we'll also, as Matt said, look at a sample of the work that our staff and administrators have been offered and have been participating in over the summer, and some snapshots even from the previous year, so you can see that connection. And then we'll end with some next steps. All right, so the work of the equity department is really centered in the idea of the cycle of cultural competency. And I like to call this humility as well, because it's all about learning and knowing that we're all on a journey, and that we should always take a step back and to reflect on the process, our practices, and policies. And part of this cycle of cultural competency are areas of awareness, knowledge, skills, and action and advocacy. And awareness is really around that personal work and raising the level of what we know and what we've experienced and extend upon that, and also increasing our knowledge around equity, and also that skill work that takes place once we are in a good zone for awareness and our knowledge. And last but not least is action and advocacy. And it's good to know about this process is that we enter in different places depending on our background knowledge and even our more current experiences. So this is a cycle and it never ends, and we always have the opportunity to continue to learn. And this is how our work has been framed within the Lake Washington School District. And part of the work of the equity department is really looking at our equity teams. And our equity team is a formal committee with responsibilities and commitments to provide guidance, leadership, and momentum to reduce those inequities and eventually eliminate them. And the purpose of our equity work within the Lake Washington School District is to enhance and improve the district efforts to ensure academic success for all of our students by closing those opportunity gaps. And with this leadership comes various roles, such as myself and my team. We're advisors, consultants, facilitators, co-leaders, and leaders, knowing that this work cannot be done in silo or alone. And so part of this work, we have district equity team. We also have school or site-based equity teams that will become and are the heart of each school. And also with this work is district-wide professional learning and development, which I'll talk about later, and also our cohort-based professional learning that is centered in the models of the different occupations that our staff and administrators have within the school district. And last but not least, part of this equity leadership development is to increase student voice, especially those of diverse populations. And that looks like representation and activism, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the session. And other areas that fall underneath the equity department are AVID, translation and interpreter services, which I share with communications, McKinney-Vento and foster care to support students that are and families that are struggling with housing insecurity, and also placement insecurity for some of our families. And also at the core of our work is family engagement, and included in this work is our natural leaders and cultural liaisons, which aim is to ensure that we have culture responsive practices and support within our schools with a voice by our families. And last but not least, we have, and as part of this work is our community engagement work, which extends with the goal of increasing our community partners. And next is a brief history of our growth over the last 3 years. And when I think about equitable systems, this is just a frame to consider as we moved across as an organization. For example, when we first started this work, before I even arrived, the district already began to visualize what this work looked like with a group of our district equity team members. And then there's been shifts into normalizing it. So we have this ongoing capacity building and making the routines of talking about race more explicit and daily. So it's not so unusual. And I think over the last year, we've really honed in on that organized frame of this, which we've continued to develop the leadership of our principals and our staff, which I'll share some more with you, and continue to build those external partnerships. And the goal is to shift in a way that we are operationalizing this work so it becomes a systems focus for us. And so this is a brief overview. When I think about our work of the Equity Department, it brings me back to Representative John Lewis, who recently passed away as a trailblazer. He said, take a long, hard look down the road you will have to travel once you have made a commitment to the work of change. Know that this transformation will not happen right away. Change often takes time. It rarely happens all at once. In the movement, we didn't know how history would play itself out. We were getting arrested and waiting in jail or standing in unmovable lines on the courthouse steps. We didn't know what would happen, but we knew it had to happen. When I think about our work in the Lake Washington School District, we know this work has to happen. And so it's been intentional work over the last 3 years. For example, in 2017, the district equity team formed, and also principals began doing some work around their own personal awareness and increasing their knowledge. And during this part, we had some consultants hired. In 2018, 2019, for example, I was hired as a director, and we continued and we started to do more work and with our equity work, and it was co-led with especially in areas of professional learning, the professional learning department. And we also established our family engagement at the district level and continued to focus on student voice, and collaboration across the district began more intensely. And last year, we also started to ensure that we're building capacity with our central office with equity work, and we hired an equity specialist and continue to enhance our family engagement program. And now the foundation. And the foundation, as we know, is what really gives body to this work, and that it makes us strong for the times ahead. And the foundational text is one that was chosen because it really is around courageous conversation and leaning into that race and equity work. So 2 components of this text is the compass and the 4 agreements. And this really keeps us grounded. With courageous conversations, it's around thinking about that compass, that where do we normally center ourselves in believing, thinking, acting, or feeling. And most of the time we may lean in a particular way, but it's really about centering ourselves and know where we start. That way we can move around this compass to support ourselves when we have difficult conversations or have to make those policy decisions. And with our 4 agreements, it's stay engaged, experience discomfort, speak your truth, and expect and accept non-closure. I really want to hone in on the number 4 because we know this is not easy work and it's not solved or fixed in one equity session. It's about work across our organization. We think about equity, our purpose of the equity work is, again, to ensure that those opportunity gaps are closed and we're providing equitable and inclusive learning and working environments for our students, families, and staff. And our commitment includes we want to remove that predictability of success and failure. We also want to interrupt inequitable practices and examine our own biases. And then to think about discovering and cultivating that unique gifts of talents and joy and interest that every human being possesses, especially our students growing up in our world. And when I think about the work we've done, it's really framed around the theory of action, which is if we engage in equity work systemically and meaningfully, then our students, staff, and communities will benefit because Lake Washington School District staff and administrators will be engaged in a way that will inform our work, how we do our work, elevating our common purpose and practices. And so for this framework, and we've heard a lot from our community around what is the accountability factors with this work. And we look at our AWSP framework, which is the accountability and coaching model and evaluation system for our administrators. They have their own definition of equity, which intersects with our own as a school district. And one of the things I want to highlight is the idea of racial literacy, which is that we actively pursue a deep understanding of our own individual racial identities and hone these abilities so we can recognize structural and systemic racism. And so as we think about that work, it's also not separate from the work of our teachers. And with our teachers, they're evaluated under a framework known as the Danielson and criterion under our state guidance. And with that, there is the idea that with cultural competence training with our teachers and the work we do across, that we'll go beyond the surface level and pay attention in a way that how we give power to a diverse point of view. And with this framework, there's a commitment to excellence. And with that commitment to excellence, it does say that a commitment to excellence cannot occur without a commitment to equity. And then I want to shift us into our classified staff. And even in the role and with the role of our classified staff, we can see this through line with professional development and growth. And for example, we look at their evaluation around a proficient and distinguished. It talks about acquiring new skills and seeking out new responsibilities and attaining goals. So the work we've done across the last couple of years has honed in on the job requirements, also that skill work, and how does that intersect with equity. So as we know, it's not one person's work, it's everyone's work. And what I wanted to share with you next is some data. and the story that it tells. But I really want to bring our attention to this quote. It says, "Stop commending people for being resilient. Instead, redesign the systems that inherently make people suffer." We think about that redesign, it's about doing something different. Our educational system is a great and bold experiment that really goes well for many of our students. But when we think about it, educational system, when we see these gaps, it is designed to work as it was originally intended. And so we want to shift that and change that as a district to redesign how we do our work within the equity department and also across our organization. So I'm going to show you some data, and I really want to make clear that the data I'm showing you, it has some deficits in it, but it's really about highlighting not the deficits within our populations, it's the deficit within the educational system as a whole and within our district, knowing that the data shows what we should be doing differently as individuals and as a system. And one of the things we want to do is not run away from data, but think about how we look at that data differently. So here we go. And we think these are some numbers for us. We have 90%, 51%, and 88%. The 90% is a snapshot from our previous school year that 90% of our administrators within the Lake Washington School District identify as white or Caucasian. 88% of our certificated staff identifies white and Caucasian. Yet 51% of our students identify as people of color. So when we think about this, it's not about trying to hire more groups of people just because. It's really about being really intentional about our cultural competency work that undergirds everything that we do, and also think about what does that shift mean for our students to see people in front of them that more represent them, and at the same time growing the capacity of every single person. And this 51% really highlights some deficits in our data that we hope to change. For example, this is our panorama data, which really tracks our social emotional learning. And this shows data from our 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. And so with this data, I just highlighted only a couple of areas. When we look at this data, we'll see that how much, for example, number 2, how much respect do students at your school show you? And these are favorable responses. If we look at those responses, 2 of our lowest areas for students that have favorable experiences were our Black, African American, and our American Indian students. So I want you to hold that in your head. And next, we look at our panorama data for our middle school students. And with this data, some similar questions were asked. And I just want to note that the information for our Black, African American, and American Indian students is combined because of the number of students that took the survey was smaller, so that way we don't have any identifying markers. When we look at this around our sense of connectivity, look at our number 3 where it shows our white students at 28%. Our white students feel only a favorable response of 28%. So that shows the opportunities and the gains we need to make so we have more of an inclusive environment. And overall, we still see that some of our populations of color still feel disconnected from our schools. So this is showing what are some things we can do differently. And next up, as we transition from elementary to middle school, now we're in high school. And these are affinity gatherings from schools, from students across our school. And this was a really in-depth focus group survey and work. And as we see that we have our Black students that highlight, for example, that they don't see staff that look similar to them. We also see that some students feel judged by their skin color in a way that's negative, and that some students are treated differently in a positive way and also in a negative way. Here we see our attendance data, and I know I'm going through this in a way, and the reason I'm framing this data this way is because this is the same data that our administrators are looking at to think about what can we do differently, and we work with our staff to shift these numbers, knowing that it's not a deficit within communities, it's something as a system that we need to pay attention to. And so here our attendance data falls in a similar line as to our other data, that we have disproportionality in our attendance of some of our groups of students of color that are not attending regularly for a myriad of reasons. And here is our last highlight of data. And here we see the top part for each category is a population density within our schools. And when we look at the bottom around exclusion rate, these are expulsions and suspensions. If we see typically, if we have 2% of the population that's Black or African American, the exclusion rate should be about the same or less than. If we notice around our students of color, especially our Native American, American Indian, Alaska Native, and our African American students, that is disproportionality. And similar to our remote learning, when we think about which students connected and connected in a small sense of the word, that they were connecting with a teacher, that they turned in some assignments, and next year we'll have a more robust way to measure this. When we look at this, that disproportionality extends across with our students of color, many of our students of color once again, and this really highlights the disparities that became more widely seen as we shifted into the coronavirus pandemic. When we think about the data that you just saw, and I know that was a quick pass, but the reason I want to show you that is what our administrators and our staff are looking at, and more to think about what we should do differently. When we think about the idea of equity in that data, we really want to think about who's not in the room. And for example, one of our bullet points here is, can we afford to do business as usual? And the thing is, we know we can't afford to do business the same way within our school district. So we need to think about, ask those questions around data, and how can we be more racially conscious so those gaps shift? And that's some of the work that we've been doing within Lake Washington. We want to shift into that data telling a story that is shared frequently, and we examine it for patterns instead of letting it exist. We also want to make, and we have been making action plans around this, because as Frederick Douglass says, it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men or humans. So the idea of this is that to support our communities in being strong, we need to be really intentional about the usage of our data. And now what I want to share with you is just brief snapshots. So it's not necessarily a learning session, but it's one so you can see what we're learning as an organization. And I have Grace Lee Boggs here and Maya Angelou. And they talk to us about it's our responsibility, and we see ourselves in that. So when we look at that data that I just showed, we're seeing ourselves in that data. And when I think about the work and the trajectory that we've been on, I think about do the best you can until you know better, then when you know better, do better. And that's what we're aiming for in Lake Washington School District. And I've seen the changes over the last couple of years. So here are some snapshots. So an array of learning opportunities are available. We are partnering with PEG, which is Pacific Educational Group, and we work with them with our administrators, will be our cabinet team, our teachers who are on building equity teams, and also we pass this work on or use this work as a foundation for also our work across other work groups. And also, speaking of other work groups, I also know that it's really foundational that the individual work is grounded in equity so people can see themselves and their work experiences in the work, so it becomes more doable and also it is realized. Another part of our work is our building equity team, and that professional learning takes place with my department and with the school sites, and this work is then supported in the buildings, and so that way we have a common message and some common learnings around that. And we also see our equity work in staff meetings and our LEAP extensions when our staff come together for professional learning. And this year we'll be doing some book studies and also affinity spaces for staff and students and families. And some of those affinity spaces were started last year and this year over the summer for staff and also for our students, those healing spaces. So those would be opened up even more to ensure that all of our communities receive support that is culturally responsive. And next up, I would like to talk about the consultation and collaboration work across the school district. This work cannot be done by one single department. So what we aim to do is to grow and extend equity work through collaborating across different departments so equity lives in every place within our district. And our activism with our students. We saw so much activism with our community and our students are really leading the way in this work. And that's what we've seen across history. So we'll take more of an active role around that student voice and extending opportunities to support our students in an affinity space and at the same time to grow activism, especially for our historically and systemically marginalized groups. But we also need to know that equity work and race and equity work is everyone's work. So it's about our whole community providing that activism push so our students are forming the world that we want them to live in and that they want to live in. And I would like to share with you next this is just an overview document that I can also place on our website. I know it's a lot. And this is really grounded in values, beliefs, and actions that we do know we hold certain values around caring relationships and a commitment to equity. But that also means we need to shift our belief systems. And when we do that, our actions come in place. And sometimes the actions come before the belief systems. But either way, that is our work within our school district, is to ensure that every action we make really reflects our beliefs and our values. And again, so when we think about our professional learning, the four agreements consistently come up and is consistently leaned into at the district level and within our buildings. And this is one of the book studies that was done 3 years ago to support our work. And now I'm sharing with you what the cycle of cultural competency or humility looks like in action. So this is from one of our recent trainings or sessions in the summer, which really was a foundational piece around the racial lens and how that intersects in our leadership. And also this work I co-facilitated with Johnny Fu, the Director of Student Services, and we looked at what does it look like to think about well-being in SEL, social emotional learning work. And then we shifted into the action and the advocacy. So this work just doesn't live alone, that it actually addresses barriers through our work. Another thing I'd like to share with you is something from the AWSP framework, again, around that accountability and coaching piece, that we know there needs to be a developed and sustained focus on a shared mission. And part of that is the why. So over the last few years in Lake Washington, we've concentrated on the why, but also we've looked at what is essential things that we need to do as a district. Because we focus on the why and the how and the what, that's how our actions really reflect what our beliefs are and who we are as a system. The next thing I would like to share with you, this is the elephant in the room. We think about our framework, it talks about developing and sustaining open and ongoing communication across and within all communities in a school is an essential skill for effective leadership. Schools lacking honest, trusting conversations are incapable of successful collaboration and growth. And so we think about the death of George Floyd, the killing of George Floyd, and countless other Black and brown people within our system and across the years. It's easy to come back and not talk about it, but the thing is, it's hard on our system if we don't. So we need to recognize there is an elephant in the room. We cannot turn away because who's caught in the cold is really our students and families, all of our students and families. So we think about the elephant in the room, and sometimes it's typical to think a racist person is bad or a not racist person is good. So as a district, we thought about what is this binary and a breakthrough of the binary, that it's not about someone just being mean-spirited or that if you're progressive, then you don't uphold racist systems. And so we talked about what does this really mean? And so what I'll share with you is that we want to make the invisible visible and think about implicit bias and what does that look like. For example, when we think about racism and the term discrimination, we sometimes think about the idea of violence or a mean letter or a cross on the lawn or someone getting beat up. But the thing is, within our systems as a school district, what it typically looks like is segregation, who is not in certain classes, who we don't hire or give an opportunity, or students don't feel like if they don't have a place. So when we think about that exclusion, it comes in across here. What information do our families know? That's what discrimination looks like on a subtle sense. We think about positive, and discrimination can be positive in the sense that we may gravitate towards someone because we're more comfortable, or we may include a certain person because they went to the same college as us. Is that we have this trust because we have those prior experiences or life experiences or backgrounds. So those are just some of the ways we're looking at it, that we have to look really deep and not just look on the far left. We have to think about all the way across what this work looks like. And what I want to share with you next is just a snapshot of the work, for example, that was done with our library team. And we went through a session that was centered on race, and that the idea that we can't be colorblind, and when people say, I don't see race, but we're all human beings. That's true. We are all human beings, but we do see race, and being colorblind really shuts away some of our families and students' experiences. So when we looked at this, I connected it to the framework for teachers. And so with this work, we looked at diverse libraries because students need to see themselves represented. And so this is some concrete work, and that we had shifts in some of our libraries across the district that they were working on making the library more inclusive around disability or ability, race, intersectionality, and that's what we want. We want mirrors for all of our students and window experiences. And so when I think about the trust and actions that come from some of our work, our leaders this summer, we looked at our AWS free framework around creating a culture that responds to characteristics of each learner. We also connected to the Danielson framework around managing a safe and positive learning environment, and our foundational plan with our strategic plan of engaging students and families and community partners. Because as we know, strong communities make strong schools, and strong schools make strong communities. And part of the work we're looking at this summer is around neurobiology and trauma, because coming back from coronavirus, whether you were sick or not, our whole country and our district was impacted by this. So part of our work was connecting that well-being and social emotional learning work. So this is just one of the slides. We wanted to be really metacognitive about what happens within our bodies when we go through this process, because our students will be experiencing this as well. And when I thought about the elephant in the room, you can be a friend with your elephant. So some of the work we talked about is how do we counteract those implicit biases, whether they be positive or negative. And we took our staff and our administrators through this process. And the reason I show this so you can see concretely what does this work look like, that it's not all about reading about it, that we are doing this work actively. And another thing that we did this summer is really exploring our our values and beliefs, and doing this idea of a listening circle. So we may talk a lot, but we also need to listen just as much. And part of this, when you think about that other slide around the behavior and counteracting bias, we did some reflection work around what does it look like to change that behavior. We also know that we need to support each other in our well-being. So we talked about how do we help people, like Mr. Rogers said, put on that sweater of those protective factors, because we want our staff and our administrators to be ready to do this work. So they need the tools and strategies to support their work as well. And so when we think about supporting that work, we want students to feel this way within a class. We want them to feel like there's benevolence, that there's well-being is at the heart of our work, that we want them to feel this openness along with our families, and we want them to feel that there's reliability, that they can depend on us to meet their needs in positive ways. And we'll come to closing on this section. When we think about family engagement, and it's last but not least, we want to shift how we work with our families. And so part of this is thinking about this is grounded in our accountability as teachers, as staff, and as administrators. That part of our work is to teach staff and not make assumptions, but also grow from where we are, because we understand that there is a power in family engagement. We lift up our families that have historically been underserved or marginalized. This is the way for every leader to really shift the focus within our building so that we don't have those gaps. And one of the things we talked about last year and even into this year is how do we shift from a traditional partnership that's more technical to a more equitable partnership, and we're changing adaptively so all of our families, especially our non-dominant families and students, are part of the process. So we are in a distributed power sharing. Instead of fixing, we're shifting to working with and collaborating. And one of the things I want to highlight before we end is around what can happen when we don't center families. Nina Simone said, you got to learn to leave the table when love's no longer being served. And the thing is, this has happened across our district and across districts in the U.S., where families are leaving the table and sometimes they don't come back. And sometimes they find other avenues, such as we think about some of our groups that have gone together and making space for imagination and Black joy and innovation and to get these improvements. But the thing is, what does it look like if we come together instead of breaking apart in this work? We want people at the table. So we want love to be served along with equity and just environments. And part of the work, like I said earlier, is that we want to become co-collaborators. So we have some theories of change around this, such as equalizing power and organizing families to lead for equitable change. And our next steps. I love this beautiful picture because it really I think about a person being in flight and how you feel when you're in that mode of flying through the air and feeling invincible. And that's what I want for our district, and that's what I really want for our kids. And for us to be able to do that important work for our kids, we have to become while doing. And this means that it's not about just learning and then we do the work in 5 years. It's about learning, assessing, and we reflect and we implement. It's this never-ending cycle through this infinity loop, that if we want to create hope for all students, we have to do the work. And that's what we've been doing, especially over the last 3 years in Lake Washington School District. And I look forward to sharing more with you. And thank you for joining us tonight.
All right, well, thank you, Gloria. So we're moving on now to the next portion of our evening, which is to talk about our elementary programs. Before we start, though, I want to say thank you to our families. We know you've been waiting for more information about the school year, information to help you plan for things like childcare and work schedules, information to be assured that your child's social and emotional and academic needs will be met in these very difficult times, and to know that the school experience will be better for your child this year. We know that with 30,000 students in our community and people across our district, we're experiencing a wide variety of circumstances and conditions, and that school is one important factor among many that you're managing. Similarly, we have people in our district who are working in our district who are also experiencing a variety of circumstances and conditions. Many of the plans that you'll hear about tonight were developed to help us make sure that our teachers, our paraeducators, office staff, instructional assistants, bus drivers, administrators will all be able to do their jobs to best serve your children in times like we've never experienced. Knowing this, the plans we'll be sharing tonight were developed by many people in our district over the summer months. And while this may seem like a long time, it really wasn't a lot to completely redesign education. To get this work done, there were literally hundreds of educators working and planning to get us ready for the fall. So I want to also take a moment to thank them, along with all the people in our district who will be working harder than they've ever worked to provide an education for our kids. Finally, we know you'll be hearing tonight, all the information you'll be hearing tonight won't answer all of your questions, but our goal is to make sure that you leave with a better idea of what the year will look like. And we want you to know that thousands of people who work in our district are committed to you and your children. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Pease, our Director of Intervention Services, Becky Cattermas, our Director of Accelerator Programs, and Emily Young, our Director of Professional Learning, to share information about our elementary program. And then following their presentation, I'll step in again to queue up our special education presentation.
Good evening, Lake Washington School District families and community members. I want to take a moment and thank you for the valuable feedback that you provided for us as we navigated into our version 2 of distance learning. We want you to understand that we care about you and your students and the information that you provided with us. Version 2, we've built off of 3 key components: equity, maximizing learning opportunities for students, and balancing workload for teachers. We want each of our students to have the best opportunity to learn, including understanding our parents have a lot of challenges sometimes in the home when they have competing work schedules and multiple children to navigate on our synchronous and asynchronous learning. As we think about the plan for Remote Learning 2.0, we want you to understand that we made clear assumptions based on the feedback that you provided us with, which included students will need to build relationships and connections with their teachers and one another. We know that students need to have opportunities to learn in small groups and be taught both synchronously and asynchronously by their teachers. We also want to ensure that parents and students have a clear understanding of how we develop and establish our online learning. Our elementary remote learning task force our elementary remote learning task force included over 90 teachers, administrators, and program specialists. I want to thank them for their tireless work over the summer to bring this learning and these key changes and modifications to the system to you. We'll address tonight curriculum and instruction, grading and assessment, schedules, as well as social emotional learning. We heard loud and clear that we needed to streamline our resources. We worked really closely with our partners across the district to come to one learning management system, Classroom Teams. We'll be working with teachers next week to talk about Classroom Team setup and be able to build a format that's easy for parents and students to navigate so that they aren't having to adapt to different landing pages within Teams, and they'll know just where to go on each site for their students to access instruction in reading, writing, math, science, and social studies. We will also be providing families with resources in a couple of different ways. We know our teachers are preparing to provide you with some one-on-one connection and small group learning around how to navigate the instructional tools. We also are producing some how-to videos so that if you aren't able to retain everything that you learn when you're in conversations with your teacher, that you'll be able to access these when you are actually getting into the resources. We also know that families are wanting to be able to plan for the instruction that we're partnering with, as well as understanding what the key assignments are for each week. So part of the team structure will include what are the key learnings for this week, the current week, as well as the previous week. So our students and families can have an opportunity to go back and review things if need be. We also we heard, and I heard from friends of mine who are parents in the system, that it was very important to understand what's due for students and when they're due and what those assignments and how they will be submitted. So we're bringing clarity to that through a landing page that provides you with the assignments for the week and how to access them in each classroom. Our teachers are planning for a variety of instruction, which moves from direct instruction with synchronous or asynchronous learning, as well as students' ability to do independent tasks. We know that parents are busy and they're trying to balance being their child's teaching partner and partnering with the schools, as well as trying to work on their own. So we have built out a system where students have some choice and some guided practice on various tasks. We will also be using the assignment feature in Teams to directly assign assignments to students that parents will receive some feedback on at the end of each week. We want you to know that our students will experience direct instruction, small group learning. They'll have the opportunity to work independently and on their assigned tasks. We also are continuing with the online adaptive technology tools of Lexia and Dreambox, and those will be available at the end of the first week of school. I want to talk to you a little bit about the learning menus, and this is where choice will come in for your student. You'll receive, your students will have access to a menu of learning, which will include a learning goal, success criteria, which will indicate to students how to reach the goals, as well as menus that include both assigned practice lessons and choice tasks to complete each week. Students will have access to asynchronous social studies lessons that are tightly aligned to content and standards with an interdisciplinary focus throughout the week. In science, there will be key concepts such as constructing explanations, arguing from evidence, developing and using models, and students will have access to Amplify Science video library. As we think about the curriculum and instruction, the key takeaway that I'd like each of you to have is that we're here to support you, to support your students. We've had to, as we're building out our remote learning experience for students, we have to remember that when we're in brick and mortar, the end user of our resources and time are students. And at this point in time, you are our partners that are helping us to provide support to the students. Our goal is every student feels successful, has relationships with teachers and students, and is able to have access and understand where they are on the continuum of learning. As we talk about grading and assessment, we want to just share with you that we are returning to standards-based grading practices for key content areas. There'll be a group of teachers and administrators and program specialists that will meet to talk about the areas of interdisciplinary skills and attributes and how those play out in a remote environment. We know that there are things that are called for in a virtual setting that are slightly different than what's called for in a brick and mortar, and we want to ensure that we're providing students with feedback and support in gaining the skills and attributes they need to be successful lifelong citizens. As we think about scheduling, this was a really important part of the model that we built in distance learning. We want all students to have access to both asynchronous and synchronous instruction. And what our hope for was to build a schedule in which we're able to have direct instruction and then small group instruction, because we have special education, safety net services, and English learner services that we want to ensure that kids have access to without missing something that's happening during their core instruction with their general ed teacher. So our schedule is built such that we try to have a schedule put in place for synchronous learning for the younger students in the morning, and because we want predictability for families so that you'll be able to access synchronous at a specific time each day, and asynchronous at a time where you'll have a little more flexibility in how students enter into those. We also know that there are a lot of families looking to partner with other families in the neighborhood in regards to learning pods or pandemic pods. So the more alike our schedules can be across our system, the better off we'll be as we partner with you and tutors and daycares to meet the needs of students. You received an email from Dr. Holman earlier at the end of last week, and he was able to share the sample of a daily schedule. Your teachers will be communicating this to you next week in regards to what a daily schedule looks like and how, and the specific times for synchronous and asynchronous instruction. As we think about asynchronous instruction, we know that our PE, music, and library specialists will be delivering lessons each week that students can access. We're going to block times on the schedule for students to access, for when they can access these, but we know that family schedules need to be flexible, and we want to be able to support that. As we talk about social emotional learning, we've tapped our teachers and our building administrators to rethink that first week of school. We're very used to stepping into the schoolhouse and setting up our classrooms and putting up our bulletin boards and building relationships with our students that first week of school. What we know is that's different in a virtual world. So what we're hoping that happens in each of your schools is your teachers will reach out, will spend some time with the class each morning, and then be able to teach a tech skill that students and parents are critical to distance learning. And then teachers will spend time meeting with parents to learn about what your hopes and wishes are for your students for this school year, and really hear about some of the challenges, because our job is help to mitigate the challenges so your students have the best educational experience possible. As we think about social emotional learning, relationships are at the core of what it is, of what builds success in a schoolhouse. And so teachers will be provided with weekly cell skill building activities, daily integrated cell practices, where each lesson should start with an introduction and a connection. How are things going? Attend to engaging students throughout a synchronous lesson. And at the end of the lesson, bring closure and summarize what the hope bars are for following lessons. We want welcoming and inclusive activities. That looks pretty different in a virtual world, but there are ways that we have developed for students to feel connected to their teacher and their peers during class instruction. We also know that the importance of a daily check-in and understanding how students are and where they are as far as how they're feeling emotionally. COVID's been hard on everyone. Our students have started their school year last year, and it was abruptly stopped, and our world has changed, and that has impacts on students and their emotional well-being. We are here to gauge that and to support them as we move through learning this school year. I'd like to now take a time and hand this over to Becky, who will speak to you in regards to our highly capable program.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Becky Cattermas, and I am the Director of Accelerated Programs, and I'm here tonight to talk specifically about our elementary highly capable programming. I am really excited to say that we are ready to be back in action in all tiers of our services this fall. We took a pause this spring and made them a bit more optional as families were beginning to navigate through the remote learning experiences and juggling multiple platforms. So you will see that you will be reached by all of our people in order to serve all of our students. I'm just thrilled that we're back and able to do that. I want to take a minute to share what has happened since we went into closure last spring. We've had groups of educators that are part of our highly capable programming that have worked alongside our remote task force in order to ensure that we are not only supporting all of our students who are in the classrooms and having differentiation, but also the students that are in our full-time programming. So thank you to those teachers and the administrators, because they have worked from the spring all the way through the summer in order to ensure that we have the best possible options for our students coming in this fall. We have 3 different tiers of services that we provide at the elementary level. The first tier is what we call the K5HC, Math and Reading. It is a pull-out service normally. We will be doing this remotely to start the school year, and we will be using what we call a flipped model. What that means is that at one point during the week, I anticipate it will be Wednesdays, but I'm not making that promise, that your student will receive an asynchronous lesson, and it may be a video or it might be a PowerPoint with the teacher speaking over to help explain the task, and they will be given some direction on here's what you need to do, here's your task to work on between now and when we meet in our small group. And then there will be a small group lesson that will be scheduled within your child's week, and they will meet with one of our highly capable teachers and a small group of students at their grade band, where they will talk about how did the activity go, what things can we do to press our thinking, how do we dive deeper into this activity, what may be the next steps. The K5HC team has been working all summer to literally take their curriculum that has been pretty well honed in over the last 2 years and make these major changes in order to be able to continue to provide this service in both math and reading. Pull-out Quest will also resume starting the second week in September, and families will be notified within the next week or so as to which day of the week it will be. It's Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday. They also have been working as a team to take the units of study that they currently have been using and make them accessible for all students during this remote setting. So there will be some synchronous activities where students will be working with teachers in a live setting similar to what we're doing right now, and also asynchronous activities that they will do, and some small group activities during that day. So it'll be 1 day per week. Our Pull-Out Quest teachers do a great job of communicating with our classroom teachers to remind them that although they are missing a day of class, they also are being given some very highly engaging, enriching activities. And so to minimize the requirements that students have as far as making up any specific work. The final group that we have is our full-time Quest classrooms. Their work, so the work that Kelly Pease just spoke to, will be used, and we will be compacting that work and also adding additional opportunities for students. So we feel like we have a really solid base. We had a group of teachers that worked through that in the gen ed materials, because we start out by using the district curriculum and then we compact it and accelerate it, and now we are ready to do something that's really exciting, which is add some supplemental materials to our Quest options. So we have 2 different resources that we are bringing to our highly capable teachers and students this fall. The first one is a resource that is directly connected to reading and math, and it is a truly gifted education resource. And I was sharing it recently with our GIAC, which is a parent group, and they were thrilled to hear that this is one of the 2 resources that we have selected. It is an online resource, so it will be available to all of our full-time students. The second resource will be available to all of our highly capable students and all of our highly capable staff, and that is a video-based resource that is a gifted ed guru has actually written, and it not only hits reading and math, but all of the content areas, including project-based learning and professional learning opportunities for our staff members. So we're really excited that not only have we been able to take all the great curriculum and opportunities we've had in the past for our students, but make them remote for our to move forward, but also add additional resources that will help supplement some of the needs of our students. The final question that I know that is out there, and I'm just going to answer it so that it doesn't end up in the survey at the end, has to do with assessments moving into the fall. And I just want to let you know that we are currently on pause with the application and the assessments. We're looking at moving them further into the school year as we work with the testing companies to determine how best to assess in a remote environment. With that, I am going to turn you over to Emily Young, who will be talking to you about professional learning.
All right, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. We know that the need for professional learning is more critical now than ever before as staff, students, and families prepare to start the year remotely for the first time. Lake Washington is known for providing comprehensive professional learning to our educators and staff, and it's actually one of the reasons why so many educators choose to come to our district. So we're well prepared to extend those supports to meet the needs of this unique time. Over the spring and summer, Lake Washington gathered feedback from parents, students, teachers, staff members, and local and national education organizations to fully understand and help us address the professional learning needs of our staff. Our professional learning plan for employees focuses on building educators' capacity in the areas of equity, remote instruction with a particular focus on engagement, safety and health training, of course, students' social emotional needs, flexible, adaptive curriculum design that gives students multiple ways to show what they're learning, and ways to make learning visible in a remote context. All teachers will complete more than 6 days of professional learning prior to the start of the school year, and professional learning will increase as the year continues. All teachers who are new to Lake Washington will also complete an additional week and a half of training to allow them to hit the ground running and be immediately effective in Lake Washington School District. While this professional learning plan has a number of strands, it's tied together with our focus on supporting and challenging all students and doing so in a remote context. Lake Washington has purchased a foundational resource, the Distance Learning Playbook by Douglas Fisher, Nancy Frey, and John Hattie, to help all educators in Lake Washington School District, and we've purchased that for every single certificated employee. This book by highly regarded education researchers provides a strong foundation in remote instruction with a particular focus on building relationships with students, ensuring instructional clarity, developing engaging tasks for students online, and providing meaningful feedback at a distance. Additionally, one of the authors, John Hattie, is leading a keynote presentation for all educators in our district next week before school begins, and we're very excited to be featuring an internationally known education expert to help us center our work for the year. Lake Washington is also developing professional learning for classified employees, including paraeducators and instructional assistants, to help them meet the needs of students and families in this complex time. As the school year begins, Lake Washington will be assessing the ongoing professional learning needs of all of our staff and will be providing differentiated professional learning in the form of instructor-led training, webinars, asynchronous e-learning, book studies, inquiry cohorts, and building collaboration time to enable our staff to work in concert to support the needs of all students. And with that quick overview, I will hand it back to Mike Van Orden, who will preview the next session for you.
Thanks, Emily. And I don't believe I introduced myself at the beginning of our session. I'm Mike Van Orden, Associate Superintendent of Teaching and Learning Services, and I get to work with all these wonderful people. I want to thank Kelly and Becky and Emily and the many educators who've been working tirelessly throughout the summer. Across all of our programs and services, we had literally hundreds of educators that were getting us ready to start in the fall. So I want to take a moment just to thank them for all the work they're doing, and thank all of our educators for the work that they will be doing as we return to school in these next few weeks. So also I wanted to mention, as I shared at the beginning, we'll continue to provide information about the school year. We gave you a snapshot tonight, but in the coming weeks and months, we'll be sharing more information for you from our central office. You'll also be getting a lot of information now from your schools and your teachers. So we want to make sure you're looking for that. That information will start to help paint a picture of what the learning experience will look like for our students. So we're about to move into our next portion of the evening, which is to talk about special education. Before we do, though, I want to provide a little context, and Dr. Hitch will go into more detail on some of this. I want to start by acknowledging that all of our students, and particularly our students with special needs, have a right to an education that meets their unique needs and abilities. And at the last community forum that we had, the community event we had, I mentioned that there were a number of dependencies that had to be in place for us to really deliver high quality services. And those dependencies are the work that we've been doing, planning around over the summer. And so as I mentioned earlier, we recognize that you've been wanting information about what the school year is going to look like, and you need that information to plan. And we also want to make sure that we're planning keeping in mind all of those different dependencies. So for example, in special education, probably one of the areas with the most connections to lots of different programs and services, and Dr. Hitch is going to talk about some of those, but just as an example, we get guidance and direction from state and federal agencies that we interpret so that we're making sure that we're providing an education to our students in the right ways, in the legal ways, in the correct ways. We work with our educators to make sure that our education is of really high quality so that when our students come into the classroom, they are getting their needs met. But there are so many other things that go into providing services for kids as well. We have a wonderful group of dedicated educators who serve as instructional assistants and paraeducators, and so they need to be brought to the table. We have bus drivers that bring our kids to school every day, and so as we think about providing in-person services or returning to school, we need to make sure our bus systems are all lined up. We have meal services that we provide. We have facilities that we need to make sure are safe. And so as our special services and all of our programs have been planning over the summer, we've been thinking about all of those different pieces, and we need to bring them together in a cohesive way. And so that's what takes the time sometimes. So as Dr. Hitch we'll begin her presentation tonight. She's going to talk about some of those dependencies, give you again some more information to help paint a picture of what the year will look like. And as I shared before, we'll be providing you information throughout the coming weeks and months as well to make sure that we're really well equipped as a community. And by community, I mean educators and families and students to really get the year started right. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hitch for her portion of the presentation, and then this will be our last presentation for the evening.
Thanks, Mike. You just described my summer with all of those different contingencies. But my name is Dr. Shannon Hitch. I'm the Executive Director of Special Services here in Lake Washington. I also always acknowledge the fact that I'm a parent. I have 2 children who attended schools in our district. In fact, today, my youngest son went and picked up his schedule and laptop from his middle school, and then to his horror found a box of school supplies waiting for him in his room. So school is really just right around the corner, and I'm excited to share some of our work with you. Here's a little bit about where we have been, where we are going, and all the work that has been engaging us over the past few months. So this is what we're going to cover in our conversation today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about background information. I will share a little bit about what our services are going to look like in September, and then outline some additional supports for families and address some questions that may have been brewing for folks. So we recognize that there are a million questions that need to be answered. We've literally fielded hundreds of questions coming to us through the Let's Talk buttons or through direct emails, and we've had a million questions that we've needed to find answers to. And this gets to all those different connections that Mike was sharing, in the sense that, you know, we are working in a system that's complex and it moves in a variety of directions, and we know that there are connections to general education and to health and safety and to state and federal requirements and district initiatives. And so we just want to acknowledge and be present in the fact that there are so many questions being asked, and we think we've got a lot of the answers. There will still be some questions that remain, and we will continue to work on those. In fact, just prior to this engagement, I was in a meeting with Glenna Gallo, who is the Assistant Superintendent for OSPI for Special Education. And it was myself and a number of special ed directors from across the state. And needless to say, the questions in the chat were just blowing up. So we have those questions just as much as parents do. And I hope today that we'll be able to clarify some things for you. So this is a little bit about where we've been. And I think it's just a great way to get a sense of the work that we've been engaged in and what we've accomplished over the past few months. We started in the spring where everyone had to shift on a dime and go to remote instruction. And it was a challenging moment for families and for teachers and for students in particular. And my heart was with all of our seniors who were trying to experience their senior year in the midst of this pandemic. And that was an incredibly challenging time for us. And we recognized that some of our students did not get their needs met during that period of time. And we understand and acknowledge people's frustrations with that. We also know that there were some children that really responded to remote learning, and we learned a lot from that. And so all of our experiences last spring help us decide how we're moving forward in a way that's going to reach and teach more of our students. June saw us moving into planning around extended school year services where we serve students remotely and in person. And it also saw us starting the planning process for how school would look like in September. In July, we were very busy with working with our different labor organizations, including LWEA that represents teachers and related service staff. We had a number of days spent working with them collaboratively at the bargaining table to really outline some of the plans moving forward in a really collaborative way with them. We also had a number of district task forces that were at play. There were task forces operating, such as my colleague shared tonight, in elementary education and secondary education and health and safety, and we had representatives from our department and special services serving on all of those committees. But within special services, we also had about 5 different groups ourselves that we were running. And we just would love to give a shout out to the folks that participated in those, including parents, principals, teachers, para-educators, and district administrators, because we were focused on a variety of considerations. We looked at compliance, we looked at our early learning programs, we looked at the issue of how do you provide specially designed instruction for behavior or social skills or social emotional learning when you're doing it remotely. And we also had some groups looking at the programs and services for the fall. And then finally, as we move into September, we know that this is going to be a busy time for teams and families. Our teachers are hitting the ground running, not only with their induction to the district if they're new, but with their back to school training and professional learning like Emily described, but they're also going to start reaching out to families in special education. And we have a number of things that we're going to accomplish over the next few weeks, including touching and meeting every single one of our families in special education, engaging in professional learning for our staff, as well as addressing IEPs and evaluations that were left pending when school ended in last spring, and that we need to address as we come back into the buildings. So I think Mike and John have both alluded to the complexity that we have in the work that we're doing, and I think sometimes it helps to understand the why of how we're trying to meet the needs of our students. And really, that is what our why is meeting the needs of our most vulnerable students and fulfilling all of our federal and legal obligations to provide students with a free and appropriate public education. But I think the context helps as well, because then you can understand how we make our decisions. And they all have to kind of work synchronously with one another in order for it to work. And so we have one cog of our wheel, which is all of the federal laws, and IDEA is the name of that federal law that governs our work in special education, as well as OSPI's guidance. And I joke because the guidance for special education and the Q&A document for special education actually is longer than what is offered for districts for their general education programs. And then we've got all of the health and safety issues that are addressed by the Department of Health and with King County. And Dr. Holman spoke to that when he initially spoke to our community around all the complexities of trying to navigate all the different rules and regulations around social distancing and around the spread of the disease in our community and how you navigate those pieces. And then we also have our staff that work daily with our students and what their needs are and addressing their concerns and making sure we're meeting them where they are at. And that's with our labor groups and coming to agreement with them. And so it's not until all of those are working synchronously with one another that we really start to be able to problem solve and really start to plan how we're moving forward in September. So I love this opening passage, which is a part of a document that is written by the University of Minnesota TIES Center. And we are currently partnering with the TIES Center, as well as the University of Washington's Herring Center, and with OSPI in our inclusionary practice work here in Lake Washington. And we're very proud of this work. And this work has continued despite us having to engage in remote learning and having to close schools and all of those other challenges. We've continued in this work and we've continued to meet with our partners because it's so important to what we know is needed for our kids in special education to be successful. And what this really speaks to, this quote, what it really speaks to is the fact that our students are general education students first. That is our guiding light. Our students are general education students first. They receive special education supports and assistance, but we have to acknowledge that that's where we begin. And so that's where I'd like us to move as we look at what is being offered for our students in general education and how we can then supplement that to meet the needs of our kids in special education. So you saw some of the tremendous work Kelly and her team have done around the elementary schedules. Similar work has happened at the secondary level, but what we know is that the remote learning experiences this fall are going to be so much more robust than they were last spring. You know, we really are reinventing education in a very short period of time. And I am incredibly proud of the work our district has done over the past few months under Mike's leadership and John's leadership, because we really have dived into how do students learn, how do we engage them in a remote learning experience, how do we make that learning meaningful, how do we measure that learning. And so we know that we will be able to support the vast majority of our students in special education utilizing a remote learning model. At the elementary level, that's going to look like one-to-one or small group instruction. It's going to potentially look like co-taught classes, which is where a general education teacher and a special education teacher work collaboratively together to support the learning of the students in the class. And it will also be provided during intervention block time, which is built into the schedule for elementary. At secondary, we have the same options. The difference is at secondary is that they do have special education content classes where students can get supports. And then there's also going to be intervention and homeroom opportunities at the secondary level. And that will be a wonderful opportunity for us to provide instruction for students in social skills and social emotional learning. So I thought it might be helpful if we broke it down into really practical terms, because as a parent, I need it to be simple and easily understood, as this is challenging to navigate. So this is an example of a remote schedule at the elementary level. And you can see that this is just a half-day schedule. I only clipped the top half of the day. And so you can see where special education remote learning can happen in this schedule. It can happen during the morning time when they're doing social emotional learning. That's a great time for a special ed teacher to provide remote instruction on social skills and behavior and organization. But you'll also see that during whole class learning time, there's going to be opportunities for small group work. And this will be where special education teachers can work with groups of students in order to fulfill the minutes of their IEPs. You can also, I didn't underline it, but it is also possible for students to get special education support in subject areas such as science. If maybe they're working on math as an area of instruction, you can build SDI into that science class if they're also doing some math skills. So there's lots of opportunities for our special ed teachers to come alongside our gen ed teachers to really meet the needs of students in the remote setting. One of the things we heard last spring was a concern around the accommodations for the students that we have who are served on 504 plans. And you know, sometimes it's challenging to ensure that accommodations are being met, particularly at the secondary level, when we have teachers that are serving so many students and each student has a complex schedule and complex needs. And so having us shifting to a remote learning space made it even more difficult for teachers to track how do I provide accommodations for the students in my classes. So we've been very targeted in our work this summer around helping design ways that staff can monitor 504 plans and accommodations and make sure that we are adjusting them to the remote learning model, because the accommodations that may have worked in an in-person model may not be what's successful with remote learning. And so teams will be adjusting 504 plans to address the new needs that students might have. And we also are going to be providing some professional learning for our general education staff. We've already done it with our principals, but in helping them understand the importance of implementing accommodations, how to do it, who to partner with, where to go with questions, all of those critical learning points. So this is a little bit about the guidance that we've received from the state. OSPI is the Office for the Superintendent of Public Instruction, and they are the folks that really kind of set the stage for how we provide services in our schools. And so if I had to sum up the 70-odd pages of guidance from OSPI, it really can be summed up into these three areas, along with a tremendous amount of resources. And I would really recommend, if you are interested, to go to the webpage for special education at OSPI, because there is a wealth of information and resources in there for families. Everything from the guidance that have been given to school districts, to federal and legal guidance, to additional information families can engage in to learn more. So it's a wonderful resource if you haven't been there before. But this is really what the guidance is focused on. It's focused on how do we provide some level of in-person learning for our students? How do we address compliance requirements and documentation needs? And then how do we consider recovery services? And so I'm going to walk you through the in-person learning piece in a moment, but just a little bit around compliance and documentation. Last spring, we wrote continuous learning plans for students, and that was basically our stopgap measure around trying to find a way to document how we were supporting students in the spring with the remote learning model. This year, we're going to be moving away from those continuous learning plans, and we're going to go back to working under the context of an IEP. And what that means is that some students will need to have their IEPs amended at the start of the school year. And so that will be something we talk about more. We also know that we need to resolve those evaluations that are still in process, but we also recognize that child find obligations are still at play, meaning if a family has a concern about their child and how they're progressing in their learning, they can still make a referral for special education assessment and a consideration for special ed services. And all of the normal timelines are still at play for that. So if there's a parent at home tonight who's worried about how their child is doing, all you need to do is reach out to the school psychologist at your neighborhood school, and they will be the ones who can answer any questions or concerns you might have about your child's learning. And then recovery services is the terminology OSPI is using around how do we support kids that lost that critical time last spring, and how do we help them catch up to meet their individual goals on their IEPs. And this is very much a work in progress. And so we will be sharing more information about this in the weeks to come. So there's a lot of interest around in-person learning. And so these are just some of the considerations that we have as we look at in-person learning opportunities for students. OSPI is very clear that we have to consider student learning needs, and they speak in their documentation to the fact that they are looking for a need to support students with very unique needs, students with vision impairments, students that are deaf and hard of hearing, or students that require the support of a one-to-one educator or paraeducator to be successful in the course of their school day. Those are the students that OSPI specifically calls out in their documentation. They also speak to a child's ability to access remote learning, and that really gets to the students that may struggle in their independence and who also may have some challenges in their cognitive understanding of what they're being asked to do in a remote learning experience. And then we also have to consider student progress and whether or not we think students are going to be able to make progress on their IEP goals within this new robust remote learning model that we have unrolling here in September. So around the considerations for in-person services, we will be utilizing a rubric that is comprehensive and looks at a variety of the components that OSPI has outlined in their guidance around the students to consider for in-person services. This will be a conversation with IEP teams, and it will be a conversation looking at a variety of issues around the students' needs. We also recognize that it's going to be primarily for the students with the highest needs, and it will be again determined by an IEP team. We've settled on a schedule of Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. There will be remote learning available on Wednesdays, but no in-person learning because we have to give teachers the opportunity to do a variety of other tasks such as student assessment, student planning, and parent connections, parent coaching during those Wednesdays. We will be running on the regular bell schedule for our in-person services, meaning we will be sending students to and from school at their regular start and end times. However, the sessions are broken up into an AM and a PM session, and each session is 2.5 hours. The reason for that is because we have to keep the number of students in a space extremely small. And so knowing that we have a need to serve a number of our students, the only way that we can meet the needs of all of those students is by having a shortened day and limiting the number of students they come in contact with. We also recognize that some of our students are going to be coming back to school and they may struggle with that. They may struggle with wearing masks. They may struggle with having their teachers wear masks. They may struggle because it's a unique experience that they've never had before, or students that are transitioning from preschool and it's their first kindergarten learning experience. And so having a shorter day schedule will allow our students to find more success, and then they can generalize their learning to the rest of their school day. We are going to keep staffing very small, knowing that we need to keep less than 10 adults and students in a class, and we'll be keeping groupings of students together in learning families so that we minimize contact with other students and teachers. The learning is going to be intensely focused on core academics, but all therapy services are going to be provided remotely, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The location is going to be at all of our middle schools and high schools, and then our elementary schools that house special programs, and transportation will be available for families that need it. This is an example of an in-person schedule, and I'm watching time and realizing my time is quickly moving along, and so I want to reassure everybody that this presentation will be available later so that you can refer back to it, because I know I'm moving quickly. So this is an example of an in-person schedule, and you can see that each column represents a classroom and a teacher and 2 paras, and those students that will be in that classroom, meaning that the teachers are coming in contact with less than 10 students. The paras are coming in contact with less than 10 students. And then the students themselves can be socially distant in the classroom spaces and are not coming in contact with a number of other individuals. And this is where we're operating under King County and the Department of Health guidelines. And we also are recognizing the fact that, and this plays into which students can get in-person services. You can see if we only have a teacher who can only serve 8 students, that really limits the number of students that can be supported in person. And when you also consider the teachers in our district who have high-risk concerns around COVID, that also limits the number of staff we have available. So we're trying to balance those considerations with Department of Health with student need. There's a break in between the 2 sessions that will allow for thorough cleaning, staff to have their lunch and their planning. Learning resources and online learning will be provided to students for the rest of their school day. So it's not like they get 2.5 hours and nothing else. They get 2.5 hours in person, and the rest of their day is offered remotely. All therapy services, and this is important because I know this was a concern for a lot of families last spring, all therapy services will be provided to students. Most all of them will be synchronous, and that will include SLPs, OTs, and PTs, and the others that provide support to our students. And so that is something that we're excited about and we know is going to be powerful for our students and families. These are our start dates. We are gradually going to transition students in, knowing that we're going to have to work through some of the initial bumps and challenges, and we're going to learn from our experiences bringing in groups of students. So our first group of students are going to start sometime between September 8th and 10th, and that's going to be for our very high need students that are in K-12 programs. Our early learning programs will be operational for our high need students. Our students that are there on a general education tuition-based program, we will be offering them remote preschool opportunities. But for our other preschool students, they will have in-person learning opportunities, including our brand new, beautiful Old Redmond Schoolhouse building, which I'm thrilled will be opening up this fall. Our transition academies will open up on the 8th of September, although they will be modified because we have considerations about how much time our students can access the community when we are still in phase 2 of the governor's plan. So all of their services will be provided on site at the academies. And then we're also recognizing that some of our students may have struggled last spring, but they may be more successful in our remote learning model. So for those students, we want to give them the opportunity to engage in remote learning for the first month, and then reconsider if any of them might need additional supports at that time. So here's what parents can expect. You can expect to be contacted by your special ed teacher and/or your child's therapist by September 1st. Remote instruction for all of our students in special education, regardless of if they're getting in-person or remote learning, remote instruction will begin on the first day of school. So there's not going to be a gap in services for them. The team is going to meet with parents to decide whether or not in-person services are needed. And again, we've got about 3,500 students in special education, and we've got about 190 teachers. And so that's part of our consideration around how many students can be in person, as well as looking at the health guidelines. So we expect that to be most of our students in remote, but some students in person, and the teams will make that decision. IEP and 504 plans will be amended as needed if a student requires that. We will also be moving into a consideration for recovery services, but we're setting that a little bit to the side as we try and get school started, and then we'll be diving into that more, and we'll be working with parents in that consideration as well, so we have their input in the planning. And then finally, we will be offering parent training videos. We have created a number of videos for parents because we heard feedback from them last spring saying, I don't know how to teach my child. And so we've created some videos around how do you teach your child in the home. And we hope that we piloted them with some parents this summer. We think they'll be very helpful for parents that are interested. So as we move forward, if you have questions, if you have concerns, we have a ladder of support for you to access. We recommend that you first speak to the members of your child's IEP team, your child's special ed teacher. Have patience, because some of our teachers are brand new to our district and they are just trying to figure out who's on first and what's on second. So they will be meeting with you, but it may take them a little bit of time. Then you can also, if you continue to have questions, work with your building principals. We've shared all this information with them and then some, and they are amazing at being partners with us in this work, and so they will be there to support you as well. And you can also connect with your special services director. We have a really, I'm lucky, I'm blessed. I have a remarkable team of directors in our department who really are passionate about meeting the needs of kids and families. And so they are there to support you as well. And that is the description of the folks in our department. We've got 2 elementary directors for the different regions. We have 2 secondary directors for the different regions, and we have our elementary learning director as well. And finally, I know that I only scratched the surface tonight, and so I am additionally blessed because I have a remarkable team of parents that I work with in our special needs PTA, and together we are going to have a parent night next week to specifically talk to our special education families, and we will be asking for questions and concerns and feedback prior to that meeting. And that way I'll be able to address them in that conversation with families on that day. So I'm looking forward to spending more time with you then. And so finally, I just want to say thank you. I want to thank all of the parents that were involved in our work this summer. That was going above and beyond for them. We actually had the opportunity to work with a couple students. That's always a blessing. Our team of principals and district administrators, as well as all of our teachers, para-educators, and LWEA and the Teamsters have also been wonderful partners for us. And we just It takes a village sometimes to figure out how all these pieces come together, and I'm very lucky to have a remarkable crew around us. And so that is special education in a very brief nutshell. And I'm only 4 minutes late, so I apologize, but I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Holman to conclude our conversations tonight.
I just want to start by saying thank you to the entire team for putting together quality presentations for our community to provide updates around these topics tonight. For our community, our families, students, thank you so much for taking the time to listen and hear about our planning for the 2021 school year. As you can see, a tremendous amount of work has been going in to provide the absolute best experience for our students, and we hope that you see that in our planning. Tomorrow night, we have another session starting at 6 o'clock again, excuse me. We'll be talking about secondary instructional programs. We'll have a session on family technology services, going into the supports around Microsoft Teams and some of the other additional supports that we will have in place. And we will also be talking about health and safety. So with that, we will conclude our session tonight. Thank you so much for attending this evening. We hope you all are well. Thank you.